And now it is my pleasure to introduce someone who's always charged up and brimming with excitement. I do not think there is anyone here who has attended a TiE event and does not know Vish Mishra. Vish is an ex-president of TiE Silicon Valley and still volunteers 24/7. It is my honor to invite Vish Mishra to introduce the next program.
Navin Chaddha leads Mayfield. He's a three-time entrepreneur turned venture capitalist, invested in over 50 companies, 37 had IPOs or been acquired. A 75% hit rate, unheard of any investor that I know. Last month, he made 13th appearance on the Forbes Midas List of top 100 investors. Last year, in top 5. Navin is a brilliant technologist with graduate and undergraduate degrees from Stanford and IIT. In all his endeavors, investing or philanthropy, Navin cares about people, addressing education, health, poverty, diversity, and equity. And for fun, Navin loves to watch cricket. Navin is now joined by Alex Konrad, Senior Editor of Forbes. Alex covers venture capital, cloud, and enterprise software out of New York. Welcome, Alex. Before you both settle down for a conversation, Navin, I'm deeply humbled to present to you TiE Venture Capitalist of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Thank you, Vish, for your kind words. It's a real honor to be getting this award from TiE, an organization I respect deeply. At this moment of the crisis in India, I would like to make a plea to everyone who's watching this video and listening to the TiEcon keynote. I would really appreciate if each one of you can dedicate your time, empathy, and money, if possible, to help everybody in India and globally. Thank you, Vish.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Navin, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. Congratulations on finishing 11th on the Midas List this year. There have been 20 years of the Midas List, and you've been on most of them.
No, thanks a lot. It's a real pleasure to be with you here, and you guys do great work, not only on the Midas List, but all the stuff you do for startups and venture capital. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
Well, thank you. The pleasure is all mine. And so you've been a venture capitalist now for quite some time and had a very successful career. I would guess that when you maybe started your career in technology, that might not have been the end goal. Tell us a little bit about how you broke into the tech sector, in the first place.
Absolutely. So I started as an entrepreneur. I grew up in India, went to IIT Delhi, came to Stanford University for my master's and PhD, and was working in the area of streaming video on the internet in 94 and 95. And then the internet started going mainstream. So I dropped out of my PhD program, took calculated risk and started a company called VXtreme. In 1996, it was backed by SoftBank Venture Capital, which became the leader in enabling video over the internet. That company was acquired by Microsoft to become Windows Media. So working with Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer, and Satya was my peer on what it is to be at a build to last organization. Once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. Went back and did a second company, iBeam Broadcasting, which was funded by Excel. That company we took public, and then it was acquired. Then did a third company, which was helping small businesses operate better by providing them back office software. It wasn't called SaaS in 2001, 2002. It was called ASPs, Application Service Providers. And that company got acquired, and I joined the venture capital business by accident. In 2004, I came into SoftBank Venture Capital. It was called Mobius Venture Capital, as in EIR. And one thing led to the other, and it transitioned into the venture career in mid-2004. So I have been doing it for 17 years now. So it was accidental. And the main reason why I did it, the transition was I felt, hey, have been through 3 startups, have enjoyed them. Maybe it's time to give back and try a new career. And here I am, 17 years later, still doing the same thing.
Wow. So let me get this straight. So you dropped out of a PhD program before that was cool. You did SaaS before that was cool. And then you joined SoftBank before that was cool.
Yeah. They were
So you've been
SoftBank
ahead of the
early
curve.
stage venture capital. Yeah, they were SoftBank early stage venture capital, not the Vision Fund. Gary Rochelle was the head, an amazing person, a mentor, and backed me multiple times as an entrepreneur, and then brought me in as an EIR. And one thing led to the other, and got into the venture side of the business.
Now, having interacted so much with venture capitalists as an entrepreneur, what made you feel like you would be an effective and happy investor back into entrepreneurs on the other side of the table?
Yeah, so I think what I loved about VCs is, and especially working with some of the legendary firms, you are driven more by having the end impact and what you can do for entrepreneurs. How do you make a difference for them? How do you act as an accelerant for them to succeed and achieve their dreams? And Mayfield was a perfect fit where I had alignment on values. And when I came in, my job one was not only to invest in the enterprise sector, but build a strategy for investing in India and hire a team and then go raise a fund. So it was essentially the company building aspect of it too, which excited me about joining the venture capital business. And looking back, I've had no remorse because I'm able to do both the company building aspect as the managing partner and got a startup opportunity to come at an established firm, which was in business at that time for essentially 35 years, but wanted to enter a new market. So that's what I've been able to do. And then the opportunity prevailed when Mayfield had a turnaround in 2008, 2009 to step us up as a leader to move the firm forward.
Now, that would be kind of like, instead of starting a startup, though, going to run a startup division at IBM or something when we think about the longevity. So was it the challenge of kind of revitalizing one of these first real, firms in all of Silicon Valley history that stood out to you? Or what was it about the challenge that was more appealing than, starting your own venture firm?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I've been very lucky to have some great mentors along the way, like Vinod Khosla, Yogan Dalal at Mayfield, who was the prior leader at Mayfield. And you look at the opportunity. So I was at Mayfield for like 5 years at that time, and I'm not a quitter. So once you start something, you have to see it through. And I was probably 38 at that time when the opportunity came to me to become the next leader of the firm. Honestly, you don't think that much. You just have the parachute with you and you say, okay, I think I know how to assemble it, and you make the plunge. And the thing that drove me is the values of the firm. The values of the firm, the founder, Tommy Davis, when he founded the firm in 1969, created a people-first culture where we believed people make products, products don't make people. And I was completely aligned with it. And our belief was, let's invest in relationships, not transactions. And to be part of a storied firm at that time, in 2009, it was 40 years in the business, to revive the brand, to rebuild the team. It was a very exciting challenge. It was not running a division. It was essentially the opportunity Satya has gotten at Microsoft, right? How do you revive and rebuild essentially a platform which lost its lust from being a top 3 firm? And then the challenge is, where can you take it?
Well, spending time with Satya and writing a cover story about his turnaround at Microsoft was one of the highlights of my career. So I think if you're in that company, that's definitely a good place to be.
Yeah, I've been lucky to have him and worked with him together as a peer when we were really, really young, in our late 20s at Microsoft.
That's so cool. Tell us a little bit about what the landscape looked like in those early years, because I know that today, Sequoia, Tiger Global, a lot of these big international brands are very active in India and the US, but I can imagine that the landscape was a bit different, as you were taking over Mayfield. So can you give us kind of that look at how things differed and maybe how they've evolved?
Yeah, so I think the market, I would say, always was competitive. But since we were coming out of a lull in 2005, 2006, there wasn't overabundance of capital. So yes, opportunities were emerging, but it was still a buyer's market. Valuations were sane. There was fewer startups. Big companies weren't innovating, and you could go in. But today, there's overabundance of capital, right? There's just too many VC firms. Everybody is an investor, right? Like in a decade back, maybe $30 billion was being invested, or 40 billion a year. Now in venture capital, it's 160 billion a year. I don't think there are that many great opportunities to be investing. $160 billion, right? So the number of actual startups being created has actually gone down per year in the last decade. Companies which get venture financing, but the amount of capital has gone 5x. So what is happening is dollars, rather than creating more companies, are essentially going into funding companies which are breaking out and putting more and more capital to work. And I would say the landscape, the other way it has changed is, which is good. The entrepreneurs are much younger. It is fashionable to drop out of college. It is fashionable to raise money at high valuations. It is fashionable to be a unicorn, even though you may not deserve it. But what has changed is the leading firms have become multi-geography and multi-stage, and they want to play in everything, and very few firms are purist firms anymore. And that was very different in 2005, 2006. People were thinking about globalization. People were thinking about late stage. There was the ecosystem, right? Like people were specialists. Now they're generalists. They do everything, some of the folks in the market. But honestly, it's a great time to be an entrepreneur. When there's overabundance of capital, it's an entrepreneur's market.
What about weathering the financial crisis that then hit just a couple of years later? Obviously, we know some really transformative businesses came out of the 2008, 2009 timeframe, but maybe that wasn't obvious right off the bat, or for you it was. At least for me, it wasn't when I was in college at the time. So tell me about kind of weathering that period and sort of how we came out of the other side of it.
Absolutely. So we had the luxury of having guidance from some of our predecessors, the second and third generation leadership of Mayfield. And surprisingly, right, like in venture capital, the best vintage years for early stage investing are when public markets are doing the worst. And the reason is, I believe when VCs exit the market, it's time to entry. And the primary reason is fear is the only thing that limits one potential. And in order to win, you need to have North Star. So actually, our 2009 vintage fund is one of the best performing funds in our history. And then followed by the 2012-13 is even better. So essentially, when markets are choppy and things look depressing, it's the time to go form startups, because you go through cycles. 8-10 years later is your liquidity cycle. These companies will become great. Now in today's market, with everything being at the peak, I scratch my head and say, hey, are these vintage years going to be the best vintage years for the industry? Because 98, 99, 2001. So it's actually time for caution. And my belief is, right, like one can't have FOMO. You need to have your own North Star, because FOMO is for sheep, right? Like you need to own your own destiny, create your own strategy and go execute on it. And that's what I tell entrepreneurs. Don't get distracted by competition is doing this. What will the biggest incumbents do? Come up with your own strategy, put your head down and execute and become the king or queen of some hill. So I think that's what we did. And there was like some other stuff that was happening in the tech market, I would say, with the coming out of iPhone and iPad, the mobile revolution started and the back end was moving to cloud. And then over time, data became the new oil and social networks were getting prevalence. So you were entering a world which was mobile first, cloud native, socially powered, and data being the new oil, which created all these great opportunities for you to essentially go and create big companies. That's what the big companies which are going public at 10, 20, 30, 40 billion in the last few years were all started in those years.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I think one of the first times we met in person was at a Mayfield party. I believe in Menlo Park. I'm a New Yorker, so, I'm always a tourist when I'm there. But I was meeting, some of the portfolio companies, and this was, a long time ago. And I was like, Lyft, Gigya, Poshmark, I've never really heard of these companies. I don't know if they're really going to be the next big thing. Obviously, all of those quite successful, right? So how have you spotted that type of company, and how has Mayfield kind of been able to pick its battles and get into companies like those and others like Tonal that kind of end up those transformative businesses?
Yeah, so I think for us, everything starts with people. So being a people-first organization, we really try to study people. What's their motivation? What's their mission? What's their values? What's driving them? Are they hungry to go through any wall? Do they have high EQ? Are they willing to surround themselves with excellence? Once you nail that part of it, then you look at the hill they want to climb. And now it's a lot of luck whether that hill pans out in 3 to 5 years. But our belief is if you back A+ people and partner with them, their initial idea, like in the case of Lyft, was Zimride, which was long distance ride sharing for universities and commuting for corporates. Didn't pan out. They quickly pivoted for short distance ride sharing and became Lyft. So for us, everything ends and starts with people. Then you make thematic bets. Some of them will work, some of them won't. But we have honed in our skills of getting in early, making thematic bets, but not going wrong on people. But you need to be patient because building companies is running a marathon. It's not a sprint. And that's the long-term perspective we have been able to take. And then having participated in so many companies, I myself have invested in over 50 companies, have been fortunate to learn a lot from entrepreneurs. And I'm able to give the same input I have learned from these entrepreneurs on what works, what doesn't, and give it to other entrepreneurs. So that's where acting as a coach, acting as a guide, ends up helping these companies. But we go wrong a lot, but that's our business, right? As Einstein said, if you don't take risk, you're never going to come up with an invention. You need more failure to get one success.
What is it about the thesis at the firm that had you set up, I'd say to have some of these really important brands of the pandemic and sort of the increasingly online world, right? I mean, Poshmark and Tonal are two of the companies that I feel like I just see people talking about on Twitter every day. And so how did you find them and sort of end up working with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So Poshmark's story is, I knew Manish through the Indian network and Thai, which is part of the conversation today, since the early 2000s. And I didn't back him at his first company, Caboodle, and it wasn't a venture financeable company, and it was acquired by Hearst, but we kept in touch. And when he was thinking of leaving Hearst Corporation, he came to me and said, like, hey, we were sitting down at Hobie's, one of the old famous Silicon Valley places where entrepreneurs and VCs meet. And he showed me the iPhone and an app called Instagram, which had just come out. And he told me, hey, for the next 6 months, Navin, I'm not going to use a laptop. All my work will be done on this. But I think what Instagram has done with photos, can you do it for e-commerce and enable people-to-people commerce? And let's focus on fashion. And one thing led to the other. But what he was missing was a core founder coming as a man going after women's fashion and going after millennials. He wasn't having the domain expertise or the relevant experience. So we connected him to his co-founder, Tracy, who comes from the fashion industry, and then led their Series A round in January of 2011, which was only 3.5 million. Today, it'll be called not a mango seed, a thin seed, right? So that's what we did. And for them, everything is about leading with love. So they are completely aligned with our values and culture. where everything they do and their success is being about their love for delighting the community and the people. So that's what we did in the case of Poshmark. He had the thesis, we helped him surround the team and said, let's go. Tonal, I was on the board of Ali's prior company, Panologic, which was building virtual desktops, where instead of running your PC locally, you run it on the cloud. The company started doing well, and then the iPad happened. And then they almost failed. The company was acquired. And then Ali was thinking through what to do next. And we brought him as an EIR. And during the transition, we realized through strength conditioning and training, he ended up losing 50 pounds. And his feeling was, how do I give it back to others? At that time, Peloton was still early. And he said, if they can do it for one part of the training market, can I do it for strength conditioning? And build a product which will have IP, but make the bet the market will go to self-do. But it will be people-assisted, where content community will be important. And then building the product was difficult, got it right, then supply chain was an issue, and then COVID hit. Nobody would have predicted it. A lot of companies have done badly, but both Poshmark and Tonal have benefited significantly because in a work from home, shelter in place environment, you don't go to gyms. You don't go for shopping. You start doing things at home. And that's what has made Tonal grow. But both of these companies were about thematic investments. We hadn't done any deal in fashion before. And we hadn't done any strength conditioning, gym equipment deal before. VCs don't do those kinds of things. And maybe people were laughing at us, right, at that time. So we went in with small checks. Tonal's initial financing was $1.5 million. Nobody would give them money. So you need to have courage of conviction, look at the entrepreneur in the eye, and go with them.
Got it. So with all your success, you did mention sort of the giving back side of Tonal's story. How do you think about sort of how you can be a positive force and the firm can be a positive force, for society and for sort of also paying it forward with your success?
Yeah. So Mayfield has had a long history of philanthropy and giving back to the local community, giving back to the world at large. And we had something called the Mayfield Fund Foundation. But looking at what was happening in our country here, what was happening globally, what's happening with climate change, what's happening with misuse of social media, and then the COVID hitting, we decided last year to pledge 1% of our management fee and carry every year towards philanthropic efforts. And that amounts to millions of dollars per year. And we feel giving that back is going to make the world better. And the basic philosophy is, how do we still continue to do well by our entrepreneurs, by our investors, but at the same time do good for the rest of the world? And to do that, you have to build business for better rather than business as usual. And we have built a conscious VC program, which has 5 pillars. It starts with conscious leadership, where we believe as leaders, one needs to combine empathy with radical candor. Second, you need to invest time, especially. And if you have money, towards philanthropic efforts for DEI, food and education programs. You need to invest in rise of individual movement, where companies have to not only elevate humans, but make them superhumans. You need to help power human and planetary health. And final pillar, the 5th pillar, is how do you help rehumanize social media, bring intimacy, authenticity, trust, and safety to human conversations. So that's where we are spending dollars, but actually are spending our passion and make it sort of a double bottom line. Do the job, yes, we have to do well by everybody, but can we do good? And Grove Collaborative is a good example of a company which is doing extremely well in the e-commerce space. They provide sustainable household, lifestyle, and luxury goods. And they decided to be plastic free by 2025. And they're plastic neutral today and don't care if their profits go down or revenues go down. They became a B Corp. So it's a double bottom line company. So I think that's where one has to just realize that my belief is if you do good, good will happen to you.
Does that help keep you motivated when, I mean, you've had a long, successful career, and I think even your venture legacy, aside from your entrepreneurship, is secure at this point. What is driving you to sort of go out there, meet with founders, fight for deals, help people hire, do all that grind, day in and day out, now at this point?
Yeah. So I think for me, I'm an eternal optimist. I believe the best is still to come. And the day I don't believe that, I joke with my team, right? I have to pass the baton to others, because once you lose that belief that the best is yet to come, right? There's no point. You're just stalling the organization. Any organization only grows as fast as the leader grows. So if the leader grows at 100%, you'll be lucky if the organization grows at 70, 80%. But if the leader is growing at 40, 50%, then it's a challenge, right? So what we did is when we rebuilt Mayfield, we started with vision and mission and solidified our values and beliefs. And we came up 10 years back with a vision statement that we'll invest in champion entrepreneurs building iconic companies who want to change the world in which we work, live, and play. So those are the kind of people we want to partner with. But what's our mission? We want to build a lasting top-tier venture firm, which is focused on people and inspired by continuous learning. And then we run the firm with objective and key results and have three things. Number one, results for LPs, top-tier performance. Number two, a differentiated, people-first, conscious VC brand. Again, top-tier in what it does. And then internally, how do we operate Mayfield as a continuous learning organization that values teamwork and keeps reinventing itself so it lasts another 50 years? So we have two jobs. One, we have had it for 50. How do we lay the foundation for another 50 for Mayfield? And then you have to take small boxes of money, make it bigger for limited partners. And then as leaders, how do we create a brand that other people can say, okay, I get it. How do I think just beyond short-term revenues and short-term profits?
Mm-hmm. So speaking of continuous growth, I want to close on a question there, which is, for all the entrepreneurs or people earlier in their careers watching, in the audience, what would be the piece of advice that you would go back and give yourself early on that sort of the more evolved Navin knows now and can share with the rest of us?
Yeah. So what I would say is, number one, surround yourself with excellence. Don't get fixated on markets. And second, remember, you're running a marathon, not a sprint. There's no overnight success that will happen. So be patient, but at the same time, have the hunger and perseverance to go through any wall.
Awesome. Well, Navin, thank you so much for sharing these insights with me. And again, congratulations 13 times on the Midas List and many more to come.
Well, thank you very much, right? It's the entrepreneurs who make us shine. We have to remember who makes it happen. Thanks a lot for having me here.
Thank you all for watching.
What a great story. Thanks, Navin and Alex. Hope you all enjoyed the keynotes.